Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. There is a lot of talk these days about trying to understand what real Islam really means. Who represents Islam? Who is it that you can turn to talk about what are the real Islamic issues? We hear all the time that there are extremists and fundamentalists and so-called radicals and jihadists or militants, Islamofascists, some might say. And at the same time, we hear comments about the mainstream Muslims or the moderate Muslims, or what would we call them? The real Muslims? The other Muslims? The normal Muslims? And so even Muslims here in the United States are having a hard time trying to understand who they are, how to fit in the proper way, where to place themselves. And it becomes necessary for Muslims, especially in the West, to start and look back to the original sources to understand who they are. What is your life about? What is it that you're supposed to be doing? How is it that you're supposed to act? What is the proper way to live your life? Well, we always say that Islam is not a religion, it's a deen, it's a way of life. But how do we really understand how to live that way of life? How do we really incorporate that and digest that into our very being so that we are acting out the proper etiquettes and conditions and actions and speech and all mannerisms of life that we express as the total way of life that is Islam? How do we get to be like the way Aisha radiallahu anha, the wife of the Prophet, said when she was asked about the character of the Prophet? She said, what? خُلُقُهُ al-Qur'an. His character was the Qur'an. It was like he was an embodiment of the way you're supposed to act. His life, his way, his whole essence reflected in action and deed and sentiment and in thought, the example that we're supposed to follow. Now, we always talk about how it's important for us in this generation to understand Islam the right way. And how do we do that? Well, here in America we have this concept of the Constitution and democracy, and this is what forms their society. And to look back upon what this society was founded on, they look back to their founding fathers. The same can be said is true of Islam. If we're going to understand how to really incorporate and understand Islam, then we have to go back to look to our predecessors, our founding fathers, the ones who were respected by the early generations to be recognized and known as leaders of the Islamic society, scholars that represent the true way, the true path, the true methodology of actions and deeds that are laid out in the example of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. Now, when we go back to try and understand what was this essence of character, what is it that a Muslim truly believes, what are his fundamentals of faith, and his creed, his bushido, his way, his essence, his path in life, they called all of those things that we sometimes refer to right now as aqidah or creed, they in the olden days used to call that the Sunnah. Because they understood that the way that we're looking for, this thing that we call aqidah, this creed, once it gets taken from understanding the principles to being put into a way of life, then it is, when it is in its most pure form, called the Sunnah. Because the most pure form of example of establishing Islam in your life was that of the Prophet Muhammad. My name is Saleem Siddiqui, and the series that we're going to be discussing in short segments is the Creed, or, as Imam Barbahaaree put it, the Sunnah. The Sunnah of Imam Barbahaaree. Now I have for your viewing here, you can buy the text in Arabic. This is the Sharh Sunnah, the explanation of the Sunnah of the Sheikh. And the text is also available in English, and it is called Explanation of the Creed. by Abu Muhammad al-Hasan ibn Ali ibn Khalif al-Barbahaaree, translated. And so we go back to this fundamental essence. If we are going to understand Islam, then we must go back to the scholars who originally understood it. We must go back to the original sources. We must go back to the term in Arabic that we use is the Salaf as-Salih, the pious predecessors. Now this term Salaf has taken on a new meaning in recent times as different groups from different countries have adopted the name of Salafi. And I want to clarify right here from the outset that we're not referring to anybody in those groups or any of that methodology of any modern times associations. We are far from any need of anything like that. But when we're talking about the Salafiyin, or the Salaf as-Salih, those pious predecessors, then we're talking about scholars and people who are well known in their community of the early generations. And as the Prophet ﷺ said, the best generation, khairul quruni, qarni, is my generation, thumma alladhina yalunahum. Then those who come after, then those who come after, and so the Sahaba, the companions, then the Tabi'in and the Tabi'in, or the following generations. And the reason why that is because as time progresses, we see, as the course of man has shown us, that knowledge slowly does start to deteriorate and get lost. And as will be the case, unfortunately, even with Islam. Islam is no different than any of the other religions that came before us. The true religion sent by Allah, the one true God, to Adam, to Moses, to Noah, to Abraham, to Jesus, to all the prophets. From the Torah to the Bible to the Quran, slowly people start to lose their knowledge. And the knowledge is taken away. And this is an unfortunate reality of the signs of the end of time. And so for those of us who are paying attention, it is always incumbent upon us to go back to the books of knowledge, to the original sources, and hear what the scholars have to say. Now, it is important to note that when we're talking about the introduction of a Sunnah, or the tradition, or the creed of the Prophet Muhammad, as explained by Imam Barbahaaree in his creed, it is the methodology of the scholars of the olden days to compile a list of points, just brief points. Here are the points of our creed. Point 1, point 2, point 3. And if you were to understand those points as maxims of law or as fundamentals of faith, then you form part of the basis of comprehending the way the whole system works. Now our goal is to try and complete the whole series in this book, the Sunnah. Now we're going to be covering the Sunnah by Imam Barbahaaree, who is considered by the scholars of his time to be one of the protectors of the faith, or the guardians of the faith. We'll be covering from part 1 all the way to the final point, which I believe is 160 or 70 points related to the faith. Some of them are very short and some of them will be long. I hope you stay tuned to this series, and that we all gain something in the importance of understanding Islam. And if you know me, then you know that I'll be throwing in little tangents and talking to you in a method and a way that is familiar to you from a Western audience, and making us think about some of the stories and how they relate to our real life. In closing, I hope you stick with us. You can find this series at hotconflict.com. That's a website. You can also listen to our live radio show and call me live on the air for the Hot Conflict radio show. Or if you're on YouTube, go to the website hotconflict.com and check us out. And one thing before we close, just because of the fact that so much of what is going on television and the media relates to the war in Iraq and the war on terrorism. The series we're going to be covering, as I said, is by Imam Barbahaaree. And Imam Barbahaaree was known to have been born and raised, according to most authorities, in the city of Baghdad, in what we now call Iraq. A strange twist of fate for us to ponder as we look back to find where are the true sources of Islamic knowledge. Thanks for listening. My name is Saleem Siddiqui. Assalamu alaikum. Peace.